The pounding on my door that morning was so loud. I thought for a second the police had shown up with a warrant. Instead, I opened it to find Rick Morrison, red-faced, clutching a stack of HOA papers like they were holy writ, his voice booming as if my living room window was some threat to civilization. Behind him, a dozen neighbors had gathered, half out of curiosity, half out of something nastier. And there was his wife Karen, phone out, already live streaming, her smile that of someone about to see a public execution. You ever have the feeling your whole life's about to change, and not for the better? Yeah, that happened. Every word, every glare was meant to break me down in front of the crowd. See, the window was never the real issue. What they wanted was a confession, a public display of submission, but I just stood there and smiled. One of those smiles that means, you have no idea what you've just started. And right then, I realized it wasn't a fight about a window anymore. They'd made a serious mistake. They picked the wrong guy. I'm Michael Thompson, 45, freshly retired after 2 decades as a city building inspector, 20 years of watching every game, every under-the-table trick, every fake complaint neighbors could invent. 6 months earlier, I'd moved to Pine Valley, chasing a quiet life and hoping to enjoy the house my dad left me. But Rick, who'd won the HOA presidency with a single vote because no one else bothered, had decided my window was a personal affront. Now, Rick and Karen were the unofficial rulers of this little patch of suburbia. Karen ran a neighborhood group online, snapping photos of fence heights, paint colors, misplaced cars, turning neighbors into her private patrol. It would have been funny if it hadn't gotten so weird so fast. My crime? I'd installed a big, beautiful window in the living room so Lisa and I could watch our backyard. Totally normal, right? Except HOA rules, written years back and ignored by everyone, said you needed permission for architectural changes. No one enforced it. Not until Rick decided to flex. But Rick didn't know who he was dealing with. While he was waving his papers, I was already thinking 2 moves ahead. I told him I'd consider my options, kept my tone even, gave him nothing. Then, instead of tearing out the window, I installed 4 high-def security cameras around my property. Karen, irony's greatest victim, immediately went online. "Uncooperative neighbor spies on us," she wrote, while literally live-streaming my house to the neighborhood. Next, the email started. First a friendly reminder, then an official warning, each one CCing every neighbor for maximum humiliation. I replied the same way every time. Received. Currently researching applicable laws. Nothing more. You could feel Rick's frustration coming through the screen, like he'd expected a meltdown, or at least a shouting match, and now he didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, I got to work, digging up every HOA bylaw, deed, permit, county record. If it was on file, I read it. Karen, meanwhile, had turned her online group into a rallying cry. What should we do about people who think they're above the law? The post blew up. Most folks sided with her, at least online. In person, though, some neighbors started looking away when I passed, not wanting to get dragged into the mess. 3 days later, Rick showed up again, this time armed with a tape measure and digital camera, dragging along Betty from number 15. Betty had appointed herself aesthetics guardian of the block. She eyed my window like she was staring down the Mona Lisa. "This window ruins our architectural unity," she declared, as if giving a Supreme Court verdict. Rick nodded like she was some expert. I just waved from inside, calm as ever, which only wound them up more. While they ramped up the drama, I kept researching. The weekend barbecue was the next stage of their campaign. Suddenly, Lisa and I were getting the cold shoulder. Mothers steered their kids away from us like we were contagious. Rick made sure everyone overheard his remarks about community values. Karen's social media blew up with posts about outsiders disrespecting the neighborhood. Lisa started getting upset. "Why not just take out the window?" she asked one night. "It's not worth all this." I showed her the stack of documents I was working on. "This isn't about the window anymore," I said. "Trust me." That's when things got ugly. One night, I came home to find my window shattered. A rock had smashed through it, leaving a spiderweb crack. My cameras caught a hooded figure, but the footage wasn't clear enough for an ID. That same evening, Rick called me. "Sorry to hear about your window. Maybe it's a sign you should have followed the rules from the start." There was a little too much satisfaction in his voice. I recorded every word. Later, Karen posted a video, standing in front of our house, talking about consequences. The community lapped it up. But I was ready. My attorney, Sarah Williams, who'd helped me on city cases for years, confirmed what I suspected. Michael, she said, this HOA was never legally registered. They have no power to fine you or suspend anything. Turns out, Rick had rewritten the bylaws himself. No vote, no notice, completely illegal. The cherry on top? My dad's trust still owned 40% of the land under 23 houses, including the pool, the gym, the tennis court, pretty much all the common spaces Rick had banned me from. And then came the twist. Rick's son, Mike, emailed me out of the blue. Wanted to meet, away from the prying eyes of the neighborhood. Turns out, Mike hated what his parents were doing. He handed over a USB stick loaded with damning emails, proof of Rick and Karen's campaign to bully me out, their plans to harass, isolate, and, yeah, talk about natural consequences. There was even unposted video of Karen talking about the rock attack. Maybe he'll learn his lesson now. The evidence was overwhelming. With Sarah's help, I demanded an emergency HOA meeting. By law, as a major landholder, they couldn't refuse. Word spread fast. People showed up in droves, expecting my public shaming. Rick stood at the podium, suit pressed, delivering his final verdict. Karen live-streamed every second. When Rick announced they'd be suing me or kicking me out, I stood up in the back. Rick, may I address the community before you act? He tried to refuse, but the crowd wanted to hear me out. I walked to the front, briefcase in hand, and laid out the facts. The HOA was never legal. Every fine and rule was bogus. Rick had rewritten the bylaws by himself. And by the way, 40% of the land, including the common areas, was still owned by my family trust. I put up property maps, deed copies, even satellite photos showing Rick and Karen's unpermitted renovations, each carrying a hefty city fine. The room went silent. Then I played the audio of Rick's call after my window was smashed, followed by Karen's video admitting she knew about the attack. Officer Martinez, the cop who'd taken my vandalism report, walked in and announced he'd be investigating Rick and Karen for harassment and property damage. And then, twist number 2, Mike Morrison, Rick's own son, stood up and apologized to everyone. My parents crossed a line, he said. They turned this place into their own kingdom. I couldn't let it go on. The betrayal stung Rick worse than anything I could have done. Mrs. Wilson, Pine Valley's oldest resident, made a motion to remove Rick as president and apologize to me. The vote was almost unanimous. Rick and Karen left, humiliated, stripped of all power. Aftermath: they were forced to pay back every dollar in illegal fees, over $127,000. Karen got hit with a $5,000 fine and community service. No live streaming allowed. Rick had to fix his deck, permit everything, pay $8,000 in fines. Mrs. Patterson was elected the new president and hired Sarah to draft actual, legal bylaws, ones that required real votes and prioritized consensus. The HOA's power was slashed. Decisions now needed a true majority. Lisa became treasurer, bringing order to the mess Rick left. I was brought on as a legal advisor, using my experience to help neighbors navigate property law. Mike built a website for transparency. The whole vibe changed. Instead of shaming posts, the neighborhood group now shared good news, supported each other, celebrated milestones. That next summer, we threw a block party right in front of my house. The once offending window now lit up with fairy lights, a symbol of how everything had changed. 2 years later, I still sit by that window every morning, coffee in hand, watching a real community grow outside. Rick and Karen, humbled, now volunteer for garden projects and keep to themselves. Proof that even bullies can change when stripped of power and forced to face the truth. So here's the question. What would you have done? Would you fight back, or would you give in to keep the peace? Does community mean following every rule, or standing up to injustice when the rules are wrong? Let me know what you think. Share your own stories below, because sometimes the smallest fight opens the biggest door to justice.